Hey everyone, I'm CP, and welcome to an Our Realm video essay. If you've been paying any sort of attention to recent video game releases, you'll probably be aware that Skyrim has had a lot of time in the sun lately. We had a special edition of the game released back in 2016, and this past E3, we had two separate versions of it showed off at two of the big three's conferences. A VR version at Sony's, and a version for the Switch at Nintendo's. It's pretty crazy to think that a game over 5 years old is still being sold at full price and ported over to new platforms. And while you could look at this as Bethesda milking their 5-year-old game, and you're not wrong to do so, we instead are going to look at it from a different angle. Because the truth of the matter is, the game is going to continue to sell well, and plenty of people will be happy to replay it. Even I admit I plan on getting the Switch version at some point because I, like many others, am willing to play the game again while I'm sitting in a car or on a friend's backyard. But why am I willing to, is the question. Why are we still playing Skyrim? To be fair, many of the points I'm about to make can be said of just about any old title, and even a few recent ones. Why are we still playing GTA 5, for example? I practically could have titled this, Why Do We Still Play Old Games in General, but Skyrim is a good example to look at for this. Look at how many YouTube channels there are who mainly, or even exclusively, talk about Skyrim character builds. Skyrim is a game that people love to revisit, and the community around it is huge and active, despite a lot of things that would maybe keep some people away from it. The game hasn't exactly aged well over the years in a lot of aspects. The graphics are an obvious area where Skyrim is really starting to show its age, which is crazy considering what a selling point the graphics were when it first came out. And the game can even be restricting when it comes to the role-playing aspect. You pretty much have to ignore the main storyline if you're playing anything evil, and many, if not the majority, of the side quests have the same outcome and the same progression despite how nice or mean you play your character. On top of all of that, there are immersion breaking inconsistencies in the writing, the skill system, and in the way NPCs and other things respond to you, regardless of how you play your character. Compare this to something even as recent as Dragon Age Inquisition, another RPG set in a fantasy world where how you play your character is supposed to be a main feature. Some of the issues are still there, like how relevant your choices actually are, but in general, Inquisition does do a better job of letting you distinguish your character in the world itself from a character build in another playthrough. Characters respond to you differently depending on what kind of person you're trying to play as, and your decisions matter a bit more than in Skyrim.
You're all dwarfy. I didn't mean nothing, but you're down there. You killed him before he could say who he worked for. And you're an elf. Well, hope you're not too elfy.
Some believe I'm the Herald of Andraste. But who are you, and what's this about?
You're kind of plain, really. All that talk, and then you're just a person.
Sure, why not? I glow. What's going on?
Yet, Dragon Age Inquisition isn't revisited the way Skyrim is. That's not to say there aren't people who replay Inquisition a lot. Lord knows I certainly do. But one may ask when comparing the two, why not play Dragon Age Inquisition instead of Skyrim? The first answer that comes to mind is that they're two completely different experiences. But when looking at the very core functions of both titles, Inquisition, from a technical standpoint, seems like the superior game at a first glance. And here is where we come to one of the unique things about video games as a medium. Video games are as much technical as they are artistic. And when looking at something technical, say a VCR for example, you don't usually revisit it when it becomes obsolete. Something like a book, on the other hand, doesn't ever become obsolete. Because art, no matter how old, can always speak to you. Video games are unique in that they encapsulate both of these perspectives. Some people probably do look at Skyrim as an old, obsolete thing. You might be saying to yourself, I'm not still playing Skyrim. And you know what? Anyone who feels that way is perfectly justified in thinking like that. Like I said before, the game hasn't really aged very well, and there are a lot of games more recent than Dragon Age Inquisition that do what Skyrim does on a much grander scale. The Witcher 3 is one of the first things people love to compare Skyrim to for this reason. despite Skyrim and Witcher 3, aside from some minute things, actually having very little in common with each other. There is one thing, though, they have in common, one big thing, but I'll get back to that when I get back to that. Now, a lot of what I've said can be taken out of context as me saying that Skyrim isn't worth playing anymore, but that's not the case at all. Again, I do plan on getting Skyrim for the Switch, and I've certainly played and replayed my fair share of the game on a bunch of different platforms. That's part of why I can say the game hasn't aged well, because of how much intimate time I've had playing it over the years. But despite this fact, there's still a huge community of people built around Skyrim. I'd even go as far as to say it's likely that more people are playing Skyrim than Fallout 4. And Fallout 4 is a technical improvement over Skyrim in a lot of the same ways that Inquisition is. But the question still remains, why are we still playing Skyrim when so many other games do a lot of the same things, but a little better? Well, why do we still watch Psycho when other slasher films do a lot of the same things, but better? Why do we still read Lord of the Rings when so many fantasy novels do a lot of the same things, but better? These things set the stage for entire genres to follow, and you have to respect the vision and the care that the people behind them had for what they made. And this isn't meant to say that what came before is worse than what's new, but because we have a greater understanding of the space these things occupy, when we make new things, we can do more with that space, and as a result, we get very different experiences. Similar to watching a silent film versus watching a modern film with sound and color. They're completely different experiences, and yet they occupy the same space. And consequently, we end up revisiting the old to experience what it offers, because in the end, you don't find a lot of the same things in the newer stuff. Playing and replaying Skyrim isn't just fun because the game is well made, and it isn't going to stand the test of time because of its scope alone. It's also fun because it takes us back to a time not very long ago when video games were much smaller, when the bar was a lot lower for video games in general, and when that bar was risen quite a bit, many would say, by Skyrim. It's insane to think back and remember when this was utterly jaw-dropping, and to look at where we are now and realize just how far video games have come and how different the medium is, even after such a short amount of time. I mentioned earlier that Skyrim and Witcher 3 had one big thing in common with each other, and that's how each one of them set the bar for their genre when they came out. Both pushed how an open world RPG could be made to feel real, and both are milestones for their genre against which all other games must be measured. I'm certain in a few years we'll look back at Witcher 3 the same way we look back at Skyrim, and we'll compare it to something else, something new that blows our minds and raises the bar yet again. Maybe Witcher 3 will get a bunch of ports to whatever new hardware is out, and maybe someone will ask, why are we still playing Witcher 3? And if they do, I have a simple answer for them, one that Isaac Newton said best. If we have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants, or in some cases, been chucked into the air by them. This is of course just one perspective, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Tell us why you think we still play Skyrim, what you thought of the video, and if you think we'll be talking about Witcher 3 in the future, all in the comments below. Expect a new video up next week, and until then I'm CP, and we'll see you next time on Our Realm.